next talk is going to be by Julian Cribb, who I should mention is one of the organizers of this conference. So we owe him also not only the very interesting talk he's going to give now, but a debt of gratitude for organizing the conference. Julian is going to talk to us about the age of renewable food. Julian Cribb is an Australian science writer and author with a focus on the existential emergency facing humanity and its solutions. A former newspaper editor and agricultural journalist, he has deep concerns about the viability of the modern food system under the multiplying threats it faces. And he is a passionate advocate for rethinking food and the human diet. So here is Julian Cribb on the age of renewable food.
The age of renewable food. In this talk, I will explore some of the grave vulnerabilities to the world food system and also some of the solutions. Food is the key to the future of human civilization and to our fate upon this planet. The world food supply is balanced on a knife edge, growing less and less secure as our numbers and our demands increase. Tonight, 130,000 more people will sit down to dinner than sat down last night. Together we consume about 24 billion meals every single day. By the mid-century, that's going to be 30 billion meals. Yet almost everything that we need to produce those meals is running out. By the mid-century, they will be in critically short supply. The world is facing a water crisis. Food already uses 2/3 of the available fresh water. Yet around the planet, rivers, lakes and wetlands are drying up. Glaciers and groundwater are vanishing. Demand for water from the swollen megacities will double by the 2050s, and demand from the mining and energy sector will triple. Under present management, there is not enough fresh water on Earth to supply all of these needs and to grow our food. As a result, water supplies to irrigation agriculture could halve at the very time farmers are being asked to double their production. The world is currently losing about 75 billion tonnes of topsoil to wind and water erosion every year. That means that 10 kilos of soil is lost for every meal that you and I eat. We've already lost 1/3 of our soils, according to Sheffield University. By the mid-century, this continued attrition will halve the area of land available to grow the world's food. Not only are our soils being sacrificed at unsustainable rates, they are becoming more depleted in minerals and nutrients, more contaminated by salt and acidity, by plastics and by toxic chemicals. This vitiates the entire food supply. The stable era in which agriculture arose has ended. It is never coming back. 2 degrees of global warming is now unavoidable, and the world is on track for +4 or 5 degrees by 2100. The food supply is a major contributor to global warming, as much as 30%. At 2 degrees, agriculture becomes far harder. It will be hit by fiercer and more frequent droughts, by heat waves, fires, floods, soil losses, pest and disease outbreaks, and transport disruption. The world food supply will become increasingly fragile. At 4 degrees, agriculture over large parts of the world will become impossible. Food supplies in many regions will collapse. There will be tsunamis of refugees, and conflicts will break out. Our need for food is the greatest destroyer of the natural world. We have cleared more than half of the world's land area for food production, and we have emptied the oceans of fish. This has led to a collapse in the number of wild animals in the last half-century, and decline in the very ecosystem services that support farming and all life itself. In addition, agriculture unleashes 5 million tonnes a year of highly specialised poisons into the Earth system. These kill pollinators and soil microbes that fertilize our crops, and they augment global warming. The great Harvard biologist E.O. Wilson says, "We are tearing down the biosphere. I do not think the world can sustain this." Every meal we now eat costs the planet 10 kilos of topsoil, 800 litres of fresh water, 1.3 litres of fossil fuel, 2 grams of fertiliser, 1/3 of a gram of pesticide, 3.5 kilos of greenhouse gases. By the mid-century, we will be devouring 11 trillion meals a year, each of them using these resources. I think you can see the problem. The brutal truth is that our present diet and food system is not sustainable. It cannot feed 10 billion people on a hot planet in the mid-21st century. It has to change. One reason it has to change is that throughout history, wars have been fought over food and the means to produce it. 2/3 of all the wars in the last 50 years were driven at root by disputes between competing groups over food, land, and water. Countries that have had no internal food crises, on the other hand, have largely experienced peace. This reveals a very great and vitally important truth. Food is the greatest weapon of peace available to humanity. If we can feed everybody adequately, we can remove the chief cause of wars in the case of 2/3 of the world's conflicts. Our response to the mighty challenges outlined is not more of the same. It is to introduce an entirely new world diet and system of food production that reuses all of the resources our present one wastes, and which is climate-proof. This is the renewable food revolution. It has 3 pillars: regenerative farming, urban food production, and deep ocean aquaculture. First, regenerative agriculture is a goal already being pursued by tens of thousands of innovative farmers worldwide. Regen is a system of farming that increases farm biodiversity, enriches soils, improves water management, and enhances ecosystem performance. It locks up more carbon. It uses fewer farm chemicals and fertilizers. It integrates plants and livestock better. And it produces fresh food that is healthier and safer for the consumer. In a world in which 2/3 of people now die from a diet-related disease, this is vital. What the regen revolution most needs to take hold globally is support from consumers like you or I, from scientists, and from investors. By 2050, the world's cities will hold nearly 7 billion of its citizens. All of these vast cities have one thing in common: they cannot feed themselves. They are gravely at risk of any disruption to the world food supply, whether due to climate, resource scarcity, conflict, or pandemic disease. What they most need is a renewable, climate-proof food supply. Our cities presently consume 2/3 of the world's nutrients and 1/3 of its fresh water. They then chuck it into landfills or sewers in an act of colossal, mindless waste. But if the world's cities were to recycle all their nutrients and water back into new food, using advanced indoor production systems, it will ensure that they never starve or go hungry. Most cities can potentially supply half or more of their own food needs locally, vastly reducing the climate footprint of feeding them. Thousands of enterprises worldwide are now exploring the use of hydroponics, aquaponics, agritecture, sky farms, micro farms, floating farms, desert farms, biocultures of plant and animal cells, food printers, and other advanced technologies to create a renewable, climate-proof food system that uses less than 1/10 of the land and water now required for agriculture. The world fish catch peaked in 1994 and has been declining ever since. The wild harvest of the oceans cannot meet the growing demand for food of humanity, and frequent conflicts are now breaking out. The answer, as on land, is to build a mighty new industry farming water plants, fish, and sea creatures in the deep oceans. Aquaculture is already the fastest growing food industry on Earth, but it is constrained by environmental, physical, and health limits. The potential for deep ocean aquaculture is vast. If well managed, it can be totally sustainable and climate-proof. It can potentially supply a third of the world's food. The world diet presently consists of about 300 different plants, yet there are more than 30,000 edible plants on planet Earth. We are ignoring 99% of the bounty of our planet, a treasure trove of nutritious, delicious, and healthy new foods to enrich our diet and our cuisine. All of these are capable of being produced renewably on farms, in cities, or on the oceans. They offer a world diet far more diverse, nutritious, balanced, tasty, and healthy. The opportunities for new industries, new livelihoods, new enterprises, better health and fresh growth from such a revolution are limited only by our imaginations. So how do we implement the three pillars of a renewable world food supply? First, we must realise that we presently spend about $70 billion a year developing new foods and $1.8 trillion on new weapons. We humans are therefore a creature that devotes 25 times more effort to killing ourselves than we do to feeding ourselves. If we were to invest just 20%, 1/5 of the world military budget in peace through food, we will not only feed everybody at all times, we will lead much healthier lives, repair our damaged planet, and suffer far fewer wars. In the end, human survival can only be assured by food, not war. A renewable food supply balanced between regenerative agriculture, urban food, and ocean food will not only help us to secure the future of our civilization and our species, it will also enable us to set up half of our presently farmed lands for the restoration of forests, grasslands, wetlands, and their wildlife. This will help immeasurably to end the sixth extinction. I here call for the creation of a Stewards of the Earth program, run mainly by farmers and indigenous people, to restore the planet. It can be funded from the weapons budget as a major world peace initiative. The vision of renewable food for all, described here, is practical, technically feasible, and totally affordable. Like the renewable energy revolution, it promises greater prosperity, well-being, health and security for all citizens of Earth. A secure food supply is, if anything, of greater importance and urgency even than renewable energy. It will help to limit all 10 of the catastrophic threats now facing humanity and described at this conference. Renewable food is the cornerstone of our civilization's future. It is the key to our fate upon this planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julian, for this this really upbeat talk. It's full of possibilities and optimism, which I think is fantastic. So I will start with a question about topsoil. So we've all recently seen the images of the sandstorm in Beijing, and there's been actually very little explanation about what caused it. Could it be, do you think, topsoil erosion from Mongolia? Because I'm thinking of the 1930s Dust Bowl, which happened in the American Midwest. And I'm wondering if we're seeing a return of this phenomenon.
Yes, so we are indeed. It's erosion all around the world. It's not just in China. You know, it's in Australia. It's in the Brazilian Amazon. It's in the United States. It's everywhere now. I mean, basically, we've removed so many trees now that the topsoil is unstable, and when the wind blows, it blows away. It would be Inner Mongolia. I mean, I go to Mongolia occasionally, and I've got to tell you, it's in pretty good condition. The country of Mongolia. You know, it's got a sustainable grazing system there. But where there's been a lot of tree clearing, as has taken place in China since the 1960s, yes, the topsoil is loose and it's blowing, and every time it rains heavily, the topsoil washes into the river. That's why we have brown rivers today instead of clear ones. That's your country blowing away, and it ends up on the bottom of the ocean, and you can't get it back once it's gone to the bottom of the ocean. So basically, you know, this is a problem that has to be solved very fast. It's very much underestimated by people. You know, it's a real concern. It's going to drive up food prices and food scarcity for all of us.
Really interesting. You drew quite an interesting link between food and wars. And you reiterated towards the end of your talk by explaining that if we spent a fraction of our military budget on food and on the renewable food revolution, that this would make a huge difference. Could you tell us a little bit more about how food and war are linked and what we could do to solve that?
Yeah, if you scrape away all the politics and ethnicity and religion in the case of most conflicts and examine what actually prompted the conflict in the first place, you will find that two different groups or more were disputing over scarce resources of food, land, and water. And if you think about it, every nation on earth, its borders enclose basically its food production capability. National borders enclose your farmland. So you know, when people fight over national borders, they're actually fighting over food. Now, 2/3 of the wars in the last 50 odd years have been triggered by a dispute like that. It's what's happening in Syria today. It's what has affected 50 conflicts in Africa. You know, World War II was actually over food. Not many people remember that now, but the German war aim was to take the Soviet farmland. And Japan wanted Manchukuo, to support its food supply. So, you know, a lot of these big wars are caused at root by insecurity in the food supply. If you can secure the food supply, you remove one big cause of wars. So I'm arguing that food is a weapon of peace. Food is more effective at stopping wars, or preventing them from happening in the first place, but lowering the tensions that lead to war. Than any other, you know, than any other device or technology that we've got. And it's got to be seen that way. So the people who are involved in military and strategic planning and assessment have to start understanding that this is a real way to actually stop wars. It stops wars much more effectively than building aircraft carriers.
It's a really interesting angle. I've never seen war explained this way. Very interesting. So we have a question from the audience. Carl Safina makes a really interesting point about, so he thinks that the talk that you gave was excellent. He has just a question about whether you think that ocean aquaculture is really climate proof, because we have a temperature changes in the ocean and acidification, which could have major ongoing effect on aquatic creatures, and therefore could make it that proposal difficult to implement. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, he's right. But the ocean on the whole is more climate resilient. The temperature doesn't vary as much in the ocean, especially the deep ocean, as it does on land. On land, you can get temperature variation of 40, 50 degrees and even more Celsius. And that really hammers your efforts to grow crops. That's why a lot of land agriculture has got to move indoors, because it's got to be protected from these violent and frequent turbulent climate effects. Now, in the oceans, depending on how deep you go, it's pretty stable. That temperature doesn't move more than half a degree or so. So that's an important point. At the moment, we're farming shallow waters off the coast. But once we move out into the deep waters, we become much more climate stable.
Jeffrey Holland is saying that you have a wonderful salad bar behind you, Julian. It's not a question, but I thought I should share. Right, so I want to bounce back on something that Sumya Swaminathan talked about yesterday, which was global public goods. And it seems like what you're talking about here, the renewable food system, could arguably be seen as a global public good. So what do we do to bring it about? In more detail, what I'm wondering about, and it sounds like somebody else in the chat is wondering about that as well, I think it's Jeffrey, actually, Jeffrey Holland, is at what level do we implement this sort of revolution? In particular, I think urban farming seems very promising. Should it be done at a city level, at a community level, nation state? How do we bring this about?
Right. Well, as I say, there's a lot of innovative farmers who are already bringing it about. Those are the regen farmers around the world, and they're swapping ideas at the speed of light on the internet. They're talking to one another and how do you do it? You know, solving problems. So that's an example of how it's happening at the grassroots level. Sumir, if I remember, also made the point that the best systems are ones that work bottom up rather than top down. So, you know, if there's a popular revolution in favor of urban food, in favor of regenerative agriculture, in favor of deep ocean aquaculture, that's what drives it. We have to get everybody to think about their diet. That's terribly important. At the moment, we're eating a diet that kills 2/3 of us. It's a very bad diet. It's a very poor diet. It's a very narrow diet. It's low in nutrition. It's full of toxins. We've got to clean it up a lot. Now, the push from that is going to come from consumers. It's going to come from enlightened consumers who've been educated about what is nasty and bad for you in your food. And they are now moving towards the farmer's market and away from the fast food outlet and things like that. As that happens, and you know, fashion can drive these things, there is going to be a huge effort, you know, worldwide to meet that market. But we're seeing things like urban farms. People are setting them up on their balconies in high-rise apartments, but people are also building $50 million sky farms at the moment. You know, there's one going up in Dubai, I believe, which is producing 250,000 airline meals a day. And Dubai is not a famous place for farming. So you know, these sky farms can be large corporate enterprises, or they can be very small backyard enterprises. It's every single scale, from tiny, from small is beautiful to huge and corporate. So really, I mean, Jeff Bezos is talking about putting 500 sky farms into 500 cities around the world. I don't know where that's got yet, but you know, it's a big activity at the moment. But bottom up is the answer. But governments also have to clear the way. It's very important for cities to say, well, we're going to stop throwing nutrients in the landfill and down the sewer pipe. We have got nutrients are the most precious thing we've got. They're what keeps us alive. If we throw them in the landfill mixed with toxins and old paints and you know, pollution, we'll never get them back. If we put them down the sewer into the ocean, we'll never get them back. So we have to recycle all the nutrients that we are currently wasting. And that's a decision that has to be taken at the city level or at the state level. So, you know, we need to have governments on our side in engineering the renewable food revolution.
Yes, I think that's a very encouraging view of the future, communities and individuals taking control of their own fate. And it was Peter Glick, I believe, yesterday, who even said, who talked a little bit about it when he said that we should perhaps no longer have lawns. And I suppose what he meant by that is we should have more productive front yards and backyards. So this links in to a question that we received from Ashley Colby, who says she's thrilled to see regenerative farming mentioned here. And she would like to ask you to touch on how you see the role of animals in regenerative farming as part of the carbon drawdown.
Okay, well, that rather depends where you're trying to farm, because, you know, there's so many different climates for agriculture around the world. But bottom line, the biggest place for storing carbon in the world is the grasslands and the savannas, right? So if you do sustainable grazing, on the lines advocated by Alan Savory, for example, worldwide. Sustainable grazing, more or less like the Mongolians and others are now undertaking. If you do that, you're going to lock up a hell of a lot of carbon, and you're going to graze the place gently, and you're going to bring back the wild species that are currently being exterminated by industrial agriculture. So that's a big one. We need to keep eating meat because we need to support sustainable grazing to regenerate the grasslands. That's a real big one. But at the individual farm level, better integration between livestock and crops has always been for hundreds of years. So you can go back to ancient Roman times and find treatises on how to get your crops and livestock to work together to produce a more productive farm. And we have to do more of that because livestock provide a lot of the nutrients for the crops, and that saves you having to buy artificial fertilizers, which are themselves climate damages, basically.
Yes, and replenish the nutrients in the soil, of course. Yes, very good point.
Recycle the nutrients is the key to it. Recycle them on farm, recycle them in the city.
Of course. So I also had a question about animals. So your talk brought to mind the talk by Professor Ceballos yesterday, who was talking about the biodiversity and the sixth extinction. When you said that we should go beyond the 300 edible plants that we usually consume and widen our culinary horizon, I got a bit concerned that we could potentially encroach on wildlife land or endanger the food supply of wild animals. Could you tell us a little bit more about your vision there and whether my concerns are not warranted?
Well, just to reiterate the point, there's 30,000 edible plants on the planet that we do not yet eat. Okay, so here are this, all you celebrity chefs. You know, there's a completely undiscovered cuisine out there, and probably 10,000 of them. You can easily gather the seeds from these plants, and then you can bring them in to your city farm, or to your regenerative farm, or even to your floating deep ocean aquaculture farm. So, you know, you're not going to take up any space or knock down any more forests or grasslands. So basically, we're just going to diversify the diet to make it more interesting, more delicious, and more healthy. Instead of what we're doing at the moment is eating the planet. We're eating all of these wild animals, wild plants to extinction. We've got to stop doing that. We've got to put the wild back. We've got to rewild half the current cleared area of the world. And I believe that indigenous people of the world and farmers who care about the land, and there are many of those, are the ideal people to do this, but we need to fund them to do it.
Mm-hmm. We have an interesting question here from Daniel Bloomstein. Everybody's really enthusiastic in the chat about the idea of urban farming. He asks, though, if we're producing food inside buildings in urban areas, what is the energy footprint on this? So he understands that, taking the example of cannabis, for example, that it's very energy intensive when it's indoors. Do you have any views on that?
Well, more and more people are adopting LED lighting and things like that, and you can control LED lighting to maximize the plant growth in your sky farm or your urban farm. So it's a low energy way of doing it, and as long as you are tapped into a sustainable energy grid, it's not a huge issue, to be honest with you. I mean, people. Basically, urban farming is in its infancy, right? We're still pioneering the best techniques. Ordinary agriculture has had 6,000 years of getting used to how you do it. Urban farming is really, 20 years old, if that. And so there's a lot of experimentation, and there's a lot of new technology coming down the line. Not just lighting, but artificial intelligence, all kinds of things that can improve, the food output from the city to make cities more self-sufficient in food, so they don't have to import it from 2,000 or 10,000 kilometers away. So yeah, energy is one of the obstacles that has to be overcome, but it's not beyond the wit of man or woman to overcome it.
Excellent. So I think we've reached our time for your Q&A. So thank you so much, Julian, for answering in such a level of detail. And feel free to answer the questions that we did not get to directly in the chat.